over Armen to you.
Thank you, Edward. Today I will be both reading and also speaking about the projects I've been working on. And I will first go through a PowerPoint of my talk and some of the work I've been engaged in. I will be taking a little more time than others, in part because of the images I'm going to show. You've seen some of them on a slideshow as you've been waiting for the speakers to begin. And I will show some more toward the end when we take questions and answers. What I'm going to be describing is a journey that I've been on. It's a journey I first thought began about 12 years ago, both an intellectual journey and a very personal journey. But the more I thought about it, I realized that this journey began even much further back in my childhood, growing up as a child of genocide survivors. Being in the presence of my grandmother, who was not only a survivor of the 1915 genocide, but was also a survivor of the 1895-96 Homeland massacres, in which she saw her father killed in front of her eyes and her body maimed by the fire that burned her house. So this journey that I will describe in this talk will primarily focus on my family, but in particular my mother's family, the Dildilians, who have provided this rich trove of photographs that you've been watching, because this was a family of photographers. But also recently I realized that I've in a way owe a debt not just to my mother's side of the family, but to my father's side of the family. Both my mother and father, who met in the United States after the Second World War, were both survivors of the genocide, being born in historic Armenia, the Ottoman Empire, before 1915. So I must pay a bit of homage to my father, who's pictured here. This photograph was taken within months of his arriving in the United States in 1927. He had survived the death marches with his mother. He lost his siblings. He spent his teenage years in a refugee camp in Aleppo, unfortunately a city that now has gone through another genocide. The country that's gone through another genocide. And upon reaching the United States, a year after his mother came to the United States and reunited with my grandfather, who had been here prior to the outbreak of the First World War, he was presented with a baby sister who's pictured here. So this was in part the rebirth of this family that had much in the way of loss. So unlike my mother's side of the family, there isn't much visual material, but this is a photograph of the family beginning again in the 1930s. But the talk will primarily focus on my mother's side of the family, and this is an image of my mother taken many years after the First World War well, not that many years. It's probably 1929. As I said, as you've seen, I am blessed with a trove of photographs that begin basically in 1888, when my grandfather, Solak Dildilian, began to learn photography, and continued with some interruptions up until the 1980s. So it's almost 100 years of family photography that began in the Ottoman Empire, continued in Greece for many decades, after the First World War, and also took place in the United States, where one of the Dildilian brothers began to practice his skill in California. And my connection to all this is the baby sitting in the lap of my grandmother, whom I described a few moments ago. But this is the photo that was taken of my grandfather, who began the family heritage of photography. Probably this was taken in Greece in the 1920s. So you can see he was born in 1872 in Yozgat, but most of his early youth was spent in Sivas, in Sebastia, in central Anatolia, and he passed away in Greece in 1935. So, and this is his father, my great-grandfather, who disliked this photograph that his son took of him. He thought it was wasn't distinguished. He was a businessman and a very accomplished, notable in Sivas, and he had a shoe business, and he made shoes for all the important people in the area, in the vilayet. If you go to the exhibition that's taking place in London at the Wiener Library, you will see another photo of my great-grandfather, the one he liked. Quite a difference between the two. But let me begin, and this is the city of Marsoobian, where many of the incidents that I will be talking about took place. This is the city where my grandmother was born, my mother was born. And this is one of the examples of the kind of photographic work that my great-grandfather did. He did these incredible panoramas. In particular, there are 360-degree panoramas taken by the family. And this image actually captures the family home and the photography studio with the glass roof. And all these white buildings are Anatolia College, the American Missionary College. It was founded in 1886 in Marsoobian. And I will just show a couple more images, and then I will start to read part of the theoretical background of what I've been doing for the last 10 years with regard to this project that's bringing together this family story. After the war ended and the genocide paused in 1918, my grandfather began work for Near East Relief, taking photographs of orphans. And this is one of the examples of the kind of photography he did for the next 2 or 3 years. These are the orphans, boy orphans gathered in Anatolia College in 1919. He also took photographs, and this is an image taken in Samsun in 1920, of the nationalist movement in Turkey. As some of you might know, if you know the history of the Republic of Turkey, in the spring of 1919, Mustafa Kemal, who later became Ataturk, arrived in Samsun Harbor to begin the national liberation movement against the occupying British, French, and Italian forces in the Ottoman Empire. And this is an image of my grandfather taking photographs of many of the nationalist leaders arriving in Samsun Harbor, including these important figures in the revolution. Bekir Samikonduk, he became Ataturk's first foreign minister. And of course, all this ended for the family in November of 1922, when they were forced to leave Samsun because of the nationalist backlash against the minorities in Turkey. As you can see, this image is on a boat, and this is my grandmother in November 1922. She was asked by my grandfather to climb up on this ladder and point to the life preserver as they're leaving the country, and she obliged. And this ship took them to Greece eventually. So you can see the range of photography he did. He did portrait photography, he did documentary photography. He worked for many, many different clients as a professional photographer. Okay, so let me now describe, and I will read this portion, what I call my memory project. It consists of 3 parts. The first part is the photography exhibitions, and I will show you a little bit about what I've done and what I'm doing with regard to these photography exhibitions. The second part relates to the books that I have written and have published and the ones that are forthcoming. And then the third are sites of memory, and this has to do with work I am doing on the ground in Turkey. And I will illustrate this through the PowerPoint I will show you in a few moments. But let me just say a few things about, in a way, who I am. I said I was a child of genocide survivors, but I'm also an academic philosopher. So I've thought quite a bit about this question of memory, and I have been fortunate to be able to bring my theoretical work on memory and moral philosophy to bear on this personal narrative that I've been privileged to possess of my family in Ottoman Turkey. So I will read this, and then I will pause a few moments to elaborate on some of these ideas. Now, the fortuitous conjunction of my philosophical work on memorial art, and one of the areas that I work in philosophy is aesthetics and the philosophy of art, and in particular about the role of art for memorialization. So the fortuitous conjunction of my work on memorial art and my research into my family's history in Ottoman Turkey before, during, and after the Armenian genocide prompted me to explore the moral demands that memory makes on us as individuals and as communities. Thus began my personal journey into my family's past and a simultaneous intellectual journey, probing the question of what ought I to do with what I have learned about the past. I soon came to realize that the stories I uncovered had an important moral dimension. My ancestors, in recording their story, in both words and the images you've seen in the photographs, were bearing witness to the unjust suffering and harm that they had undergone. Thus it became my duty, my moral duty, to tell their story, and in so doing, to acknowledge their suffering. Acknowledging suffering is the first step in the process of moral repair, the moral repair that must follow upon such acts as genocide and crimes against humanity. Yet it soon became obvious to me that the audience for my memory work must not be restricted to those familiar with the events of 1915. My Armenian, my Greek, or my audiences in America or in Europe that have some knowledge of these events. But it's important that I speak to an audience in the perpetrator society, and that's why my work has focused in the last 6 or 7 years in Turkey. I have journeyed to Turkey more than a dozen times. I've really sort of lost count, and on Saturday I will be flying to Ankara again for the 3rd time this year. In order to put into place a memory project that functions on multiple levels, including the aesthetic, the ethical, and most controversially, the political. My project is by definition political because it presents what I call a counter-memory to the government-controlled foundational myth of the Turkish Republic. So my presentation today primarily will be a report, maybe a report from the trenches of progress on this memory work. At the same time, I will critically evaluate how my memory work is intended to function and justified in terms of the moral concept of bearing witness. My thesis, all philosophers need a thesis, and the objective of my project is outlined above. I claim that collective memory and individual memory do not exist in separate realms, but are intricately intertwined. The collective memory of a group is incorporated explicitly and implicitly into the individual memories of its members, and at the same time they, the individuals, put the stamp of their personal memories on the memories they share as members of a group. One can think about this in terms of an experience I've had in attending our family reunions every year. We tell many stories at these family reunions, and many times I can't remember if what we're talking about was an event that I actually participated in. And sometimes it's clear that I didn't participate, but it's become my own individual personal memory. So it's become, in a way, the collective memory of the group. And this is what I mean by the claim that individual memory and collective memory are intertwined. Our memory projects are designed then to reach individual Turkish citizens in such a way as to change the collective memory of Turkish society. The ultimate goal is to encourage Turks to take responsibility for their nation's past, and in doing so, to collectively do justice to that past. While this is clearly an overly ambitious goal, one that I do not pretend can be achieved in the short term, maybe even in my own lifetime, but it's still the guiding end in view that morally compels my work and the work of my important partners in Turkey today. One way of understanding the work we are doing is to see it in the light of the concept of witnessing. These are just some more statements about collective memory. I'm not going to go through these with you. I'm going to move to the concept of bearing witness. Now, much has been written on the concept of witnessing, and particularly the moral notion of bearing witness. I cannot attempt to summarize that here because the literature is so vast, but I want to highlight a few things. Aside from the general obligations of remembrance, and I see some people I noticed today have the poppies for remembering the armistice on November 11th. Aside from the general obligations of remembrance, remembrance in the form of bearing witness is commonly restricted to certain types of situations. What one often bears witness to is the suffering of others or the circumstances of their deaths, usually circumstances involving unjust acts and violations of their human rights. I needn't list here all the forms of suffering I have in mind. We are all too familiar with these. The salient characteristic that marks those for whom one bears witness is the harm suffered under unjust circumstances. Of course, and most importantly for our project, this does not preclude remembering individuals in other, more positive ways. That is why the photography exhibition does not simply focus on the events of the genocide and its aftermath. We present both the good and the bad. So in a way, we're celebrating the lives. We're not merely focusing in a morbid way upon the events that happened in 1915, 16, 17, but we're focusing on the rich and full lives of these Armenians and their fellow citizens in Ottoman Turkey, the Greeks, the Turks, and also the Jews in the community. If we had only focused upon the victims of the genocide, the victims of persecution, torture, and murder, we could be seen as victimizing them a second time, and sometimes this happens in some of the work that is done on genocide, unfortunately. Remembering our dear departed as fully human, that is, as active and multidimensional individuals, is part and parcel of the moral obligation of remembrance and is crucial to restoring the human dignity that the forces of evil try to take away from them. Our exhibition bears witness not just to those who died in the genocide, but just as importantly to all those who survived. Their fortitude, ingenuity, and courage are all witnessed in this project. Needless to say, I would not be here if not for the courage displayed by my grandparents' generation during those most horrific times. Now, the work I am engaged in serves a memorializing function. As I said, I am privileged to be able to use the art, the photographic art of my ancestors, to carry out this important function. Memorials and memorial art can serve many functions. They can be addressed to a small audience, such as family and friends, or a wider public audience. Not all memorialization is bearing witness. I mean, we memorialize individuals who've died in heroic acts. Bearing witness has to do with memorializing those who have died under unjust circumstances, whose stories need to be told. Crucial to the concept of bearing witness is the idea of testimony. Witnesses are supposed to seek to uncover and to relate the truth about what happened or is still happening. One can bear witness to crimes going on today, and we see that in particular in what's going on in the Middle East with regard to Syria and Iraq. If this is not only what witnesses do, but what they ought to do, then an obligation to bear witness to the past suffering of those who are now dead is not simply an obligation to remember them in the light of this suffering. More than this, it is an obligation to get at and tell the truth about this suffering, a truth that may be hidden or obscured, or is one that others may, for various reasons, not want disclosed. This is especially important in the case of the Armenian genocide because of the continuing campaign of denial by the Turkish state. Needless to say, there has been a 100-year history of denial of the suffering of the Armenian people. Those who bear witness understand themselves to have a responsibility to find out the truth, to tell it, and to hold fast to it. The imperative to speak the truth in the context of bearing witness adds a greater burden on those who engage in memory work in hostile and indifferent societies. Memorial art can and often is propagandistic, turns into propaganda, and that's what I most importantly try to avoid in my work on the Armenian genocide. Memorial art has to seek to speak the truth, to bear witness. It must avoid the trap of responding in kind to those who perpetrated acts of unjust suffering. So it puts an obligation on me not to do what the perpetrators do in their denial, in distorting the truth. While some acts of bearing witness address a relatively small audience and may soon be forgotten, others have a larger public audience and take on a wider historical importance. They become part of the public record and may shape and be incorporated into the collective historical consciousness. As suggested at the beginning of my talk, the primary goal of our memory project is to begin a process of gradual change in the collective memory of the Turkish people, a change that is required for building a democratic way of life. So this is ultimately for the Turkish citizens who desire to have a fully functioning and flourishing democracy in their country. Understanding the nature of our audience has been crucial for our project. Within Turkey, we have multiple audiences. If we are going to succeed in positively affecting, and I'm using the word we because none of this would be possible as an individual working. I have partnered with some very courageous NGOs on my projects, and I will mention them later when I show you more slides. If we are going to succeed in positively affecting Turkish historical consciousness in whatever small way that we can, then we must be nuanced in our approach to our audience. Our general definition of witnessing entails that witnesses direct their testimony to those in need of evidence. In other words, witnessing is an activity of communication directed at an audience with some particular need for evidence that the testimony of the witness might provide. This need may not be fully evident to the intended audience. This is certainly the case in Turkey. Thus, our project needs to be careful in crafting the testimony of that our witnessing provides. And I will highlight some instances of this when I show more details of the exhibition. Unlike other forms of remembrance, bearing witness may have the effect of psychic healing for the witness rememberer, as well as a reparative action taken by the audience in response to the testimony. And I'm talking about the psychic repair for the descendants of those who have experienced the genocide, the passed on trauma. So in a way, my project not only has a reparative moral dimension for the audiences in Turkey, but it also has an important role in the Armenian diaspora community and also in the Republic of Armenia. And in a way, it's also had an effect on me as an individual, because in many ways I've experienced that psychic healing in the process of going through this material and presenting it to audiences. I am not the person I was as a teenager who grew up in an Armenian diaspora community in New York City, who had a very essentialist and I would say bordering on racist view of Turks. Part of my process of psychic healing, I think, has come, I've come a long way from that kind of experience as a child. So let me now say some things about the exhibitions themselves. The first exhibition that we had took place in 2013 in April. We opened it soon after the important date of April 24th. Actually, that date is wrong. We opened it on April 25th in Istanbul at this very large exhibition art center depot. It was a converted tobacco warehouse, part of the family legacy of Osman Kavala of Anadolu Kültür, an NGO that he founded, which uses the arts to address questions of human rights and social justice. The exhibition was on 2 floors. We have here many of the images, some of them quite large, that we were preparing to install in the exhibition space. As you can see, the exhibition had a lot of textual material. This is all in Turkish. The images themselves were subtitled in English and Turkish, but we were able, given the quality and the resolution of the photographs, to enlarge them. In this case, this is 5-6 feet of this portrait of my family, the last portrait taken of them before leaving Turkey in 1922. As you can see, there are panels with the narrative story of the family, beginning basically in the 1870s, though the family story actually goes back to the 1700s and how they got their family name. Because my great-great-great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a blacksmith. And something he did resulted in his being called Dildilyan. In any case, as you can see, we also had on the second floor, unlike the first floor of the exhibit, we had many samples of the photography that they were engaged in. This wall here has to do with the work that they did for Near East relief with regard to the refugees. This is just an example of one of the panels. I don't know if you can see it, it's 1899. This talks about the marriage of my grandfather and grandmother and the house that they built, which still exists today in Marsoobian, Marsoobian as it's called, which I've visited on a number of occasions. These are just examples of some of the work they did. They were obviously taking photographs of both Armenians, Turks, and Greeks in the community, and dogs of any nationality. We also had on the second floor, besides examples of their photographic work, for people who want to spend more time and read some of the historical background, we prepared these texts on the columns that tell something about the community, tell something about the details of the history of Anatolia College, the American Missionary College for which my grandfather was the official photographer. There was a lot of reading to do here, and I was shocked at how many people spent hours at the exhibition reading this material. Besides having booklets that we distributed free of charge, both in English and Turkish, that had the same text material if they didn't have time to read it in this space. Again, you can see the size of the images we were dealing with. In the distance, I don't know if you can see, there were examples of drawings that the family did. There were hundreds of drawings. Photography was an art, and many people came to photography for two reasons. One, they had an artistic bent, and also they had some interest in technology. And my grandfather was that kind of individual, and his brother, who eventually joined him as the Dildilyan brothers photographers. So more examples of what it looked like. And there was a small glass display of a few of the original photographs. For security reasons, we didn't have many of the original photographs in the space. But as you can see, there are also a number of postcards. Another aspect of the family business was to prepare photographs that were made into postcards, and postcards became very popular at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and they succeeded quite handsomely in developing a relationship with printers who made these postcards. And this postcard here, unfortunately, most of the family postcards wound up in the Black Sea. As the family was leaving in 1922, there's a paragraph describing the fact that the Greek orphans on the ship that they were on, there were both Greek and Armenian orphans, were unsupervised. And my uncle discovers the Greek orphans taking a trunk of his and dumping it into the ocean. And in that trunk was his stamp collection and his postcard collection. So I've tried to make up for that by buying these postcards on internet auctions, and this one cost me 250 euros. So the more I speak, the more the prices go up. Unfortunately, I just yesterday lost out on a bid for a photograph taken by my grandfather in 1921 in Samsun. I bid 350 Turkish lira, and it was bought for 375 Turkish lira. So it's going to be hard to keep up with this. This is just an image of my uncle, who did some photography work but went on to become a trustee of Anatolia College. Another important part of the exhibition was video testimony, and I don't know if this will work, but I will try. We had prepared 2 videos, and if you're at the Wiener Library, there's an exhibition going on there currently. It runs to the end of February. It has a very small number of the photographs, few of the original photographs, but also has these 2 video testimonies, one by my Uncle Ara, who gave this testimony in 1968. It's an audio recording, and we made a video out of it using images, using the photographs. And we had a separate room for people who could listen to this testimony.
My name is Ara Geldelian. I live in Fonda, Old Trail, New York. I was born in Marsoobian. Marsoobian is located probably about 50 miles south from Samsun on the Black Sea. It was a college town, and Anatolia College was very close to our house. In fact, our house was a part of the campus. Marsoobian was a very old city, and had a very large Armenian colony, not a colony, but settlement. The old part of the city, the citadel, was the Armenian church, and Armenian sections all around it. There was a very small Greek population there. It was a new settlement. Of course, Greeks were living in that neighborhood also for centuries, because that's considered a part of Pontus. It was quite an intellectual community. Armenians had very good schools, and Anatolia College was established there, which became a source of inspiration probably, or enlightenment. And there was the American hospital there, very massive stone building. Really, it was a good college community atmosphere, concerts, lectures, museum. I know I was a small child then, but our neighbor, Dr. Marsoobian, who was quite a scientist, he was the curator of the museum. Perhaps I acquired my interest in minerals and rocks and antiques and you name it from him.
I'm going to just skip ahead because
Few of their belongings. Morning, the orders would come that on a certain day, this street people would be ready. In the morning, the oxen-driven wagons would come.
describing the deportation.
People were allowed to take just a few of their belongings, and you'd see them go. And endless, they'd go, and up the hill, our house was on a hill, they had to go that way, and its surprising thing was that the rule was that the same drivers would be back with the cart within a day or so, and to take another load, and they knew that the people were not being driven very far, and that they just, to a certain point, beyond that, they were either being massacred, or the women and the girls taken away from them, and the others just walked until they dropped dead. But in fact, I remember one neighbor to the south of us, downhill. They were the whole family were over there, and they had a baby boy. And I was asked to take care of the baby boy, and of course they were waiting for the ox wagons to come and to pick them up. And then the word came that they were there. And just as they were living, I remember that one. Keep it.
I didn't get that clearly.
Yeah, she said, keep the baby, and we kept the baby. And that baby stayed with us until the war was over. We found his grandmother. Grandmother stayed with us later on. And he is in Greece now. And that's the way it happened. That it just
Okay, that was just a sample from that video that we created, in which he gives a first-hand witness account of what happened in 1915, in July and August 1915, during the deportations. And we also included a second video, which, let's see if this works. This is an interview with my mother many years later. She was only 4 years old in 1915. Her memories are quite different from her older brother. She has no memory of the actual deportation.
Only photograph of that section. That's why the Turks didn't kill him. They just took him as a soldier, and they used to. That's why our family didn't go to Axel.
They were deported.
No. And whoever was there, all my relatives, some of my aunts and so on, uncles, he kept them. He could keep all the relatives. They did in Marsoobian, whoever was. But the others that were in Samson or Sepatia or Harper, they all were deported and were killed, most of them, nearly all of them.
Before we talk about the war,
Okay.
I'd like to ask some questions about your father's business.
And
Yes.
here she
His lab
she talks about her memories of her childhood and photography. And I'm just going to skip to the end because I want to leave you with a much more happy memory. And let's see if I find it.
Married. They're stairs went, and I just stairs like stairs.
Sorry, Mom.
And there were two little rooms and a little open place where during the war my mother made also they with clothes had to put, and there were two rooms there, and there was a stairway like white wood. Very often that stairs I dream in my dream, that I go stairs like that. I was, a few times it happened. I said, what I dream? I never said. Afterwards I remember that it must be that stairs that I guess, the old house, I always dream of it. And I just dream one thing. I remember when my uncle, the one that got married, his wedding, and we were all, as I told you, from the studio stairs went up, and there was a balcony. All these young children were sitting all at that balcony and looking down in the bay, the weather. that place is very clear in my eyes. And two things in that house, my childhood. One is winter mornings. We had a big wooden stove in the studio, which had to go to the chimney and would warm all the house. And my father, every morning, got up and put a fire. And we children would come, especially the younger one, I remember always, get my clothes, come down to the warm place. And he used to do the bread. He used to toast on the stove. And my mother would put the butter on it. And that smell, the toast, it is so in my eyes. I will never forget that. And one summer day, I remember, we had a balcony at the backyard, and we had our supper there. And that I remember. That too is so clear in my vision.
You have happy memories.
Hmm?
Your memories are happy memories.
Yes.
Okay. And this is a photograph taken by my grandfather and my grandmother of my mother, probably running down those same steps in her nightgown with her clothes. There's a whole series of them of her on these steps. So he was an amazing photographer, and I don't think my mother realized that she was describing what is captured in this image. Next, we took the exhibition to Mersoobian, which was the home where my mother was born and my grandfather and grandmother raised their family. This was also sponsored not only by Ana de la Culture, but we got local sponsors, a committee of like-minded, progressive Turks in Mersoobian, and the Business Chamber of Commerce also kicked in some bucks, which we were very pleased to have. Mersoobian is toward the north in central Anatolia, near the Black Sea. We have the exhibition in a Tashan. This was a combination hotel market from about the 1700s, a historic building, so we had to completely redesign the exhibition. There's a lot of Armenian graffiti, because a lot of the Armenian merchants use this building. And we designed it in these panels that we hung in the exhibit, in the restored Tashan along the halls. Very impressive building, and the way the display work was quite effective. We used all these walls, we hung it from the pillars. We tried to duplicate as much of the material, though we couldn't do all of it in this space. This was talking about nuance. I was talking about needing to be careful about the audience. Because of the more conservative area that we were holding this exhibition, we decided we made a decision with our local sponsors not to use the word genocide in the exhibition. We didn't use the Ermeni soykırım, the Turkish word for genocide. We had taken it out of the exhibition, except we made a mistake. We left it in one place, and we discovered that the night before the exhibition was going to open, and it's in this phrase translated from the Turkish. April 24th is indelibly marked in the memory of the Armenians as Nezyakim, becoming the date on which they will commemorate the Armenian genocide for generations to come. So we were left with a dilemma what to do. This panel, as you see for 1915, was black with white lettering. All the other panels were white with black lettering, which gave us an easy solution to the problem. We took a piece of black tape and we covered the word soykırım. So it came out to, they will commemorate the Armenian blank for generations to come. And as a result of that, this panel, I think, got even more focused, because people looked at the empty space. They already knew what was the history here that was being described. So in its absence, it was more present than if we had actually used the word.
Very good.
And these are some of the school students. A number of the principals in the town came, brought students. These are students that I met the year before in an English class in the former Anatolia College Hospital that's now a high school. And I visited the school, talked with the director. He had no idea the history of the place. And I told him about the history, and I said, I have old photographs of when it was a hospital. My grandfather worked in that school because photographers, as the technicians of taking images, ran the first X-ray machine. So my grandfather ran the X-ray machine in Anatolia College back when, before the First World War. So I sent to the director large enlargements of photographs of the building in the neighborhood back before the First World War. They're hanging in the hallways and the lobbies of the school now with accurate descriptions of what the building was. And that's the third exhibition was in Diyarbakir, Sir Girgos Church. This is run by the Sir Girgos Foundation Anadolu Culture. This is the largest Armenian church in the Middle East. It was in ruins, and through the help of the Armenian diaspora community and also the municipality in Diyarbakir, which is now almost completely a Kurdish region, they were able to restore the church. This is the way the church looks today. And we opened the exhibition the Sunday, Easter Sunday of 2014. The first Easter Mass was performed on that day, and we had the panels hanging both in the portico and some of the exterior walls and in the some of the rooms outside the church. And then finally, the exhibition that's going to open next week in Ankara. I'm heading to Ankara on Saturday to work on this exhibition. It's sponsored by the Association for Aesthetics and Visual Culture and Anadolu Culture. It's in a big gallery space. The unique thing about this exhibition, this will be the first time we will be having it not in a private space, but in a public space. This is owned by the municipality of this part of Ankara, so it's a government space. And it's a very large space, and this is Jale Erzun of the Sanart. She was at Middle East Technical University, and she's done much to support the project. And finally, I won't say much here. This is the book that I published in English about the family history. Part of the memory project is to make sure this is available in Turkey, and a Turkish translation has been completed and will come out later this year. And then a second book, a bilingual photography book, will come out with many of the images, and that will be also available in Turkey. And the last will be the sites of remembrance, and one of them is Marsoobian, where I've traveled quite a bit. Let me just show you a few images. This is the family home, as I said, and as you can see, the glass of the studio. And unfortunately, I think my grandfather might have been upset because he took this photograph from the roof of the American hospital. It was made into a 360-degree panorama. So obviously from that point, he couldn't have seen that his wife had hung the laundry out in the window. And it was probably only when he went to the studio and did an enlargement that he saw the laundry there and was a little upset. Of course, I'm making that up, but this is the house as it exists today. I was able to locate it through Google Earth because of the odd shape of the roof where the glass used to be for the studio. And I've been welcomed back every time I'm in Marsoobian by the couple, the brother and sister that live in the house. They were part of the Greek-Turkish population exchange. They left a village outside of Thessaloniki moved into this house within a year of my family moving out. So there was a mutual exile in both these families. So I think that partly contributes to the kind of rapport I have with this family. They've told me stories about their family, their grandfather moving into the house and being very proud of having the best house with hot and cold running water in the town at the time. So we get to share memories of the same place, their memories post my family leaving and my memories prior to their family's arrival. And I very much appreciate their welcoming. This is the hospital, as I said, where my grandfather ran the x-ray machine, and from the roof of this hospital he took that panoramic photograph. This is the building today restored as the high school, and as I said, we put the images in it. This is the director of the high school. And as you can see, we're standing on the balcony, and in the distance is my grandfather's house. We're just talking about the project. These are all the Armenian houses of the professors of the college, and this is my grandfather's house here across the street from the college. These are some of the houses that exist today. That house that you saw in the prior image was Professor Akopian, very famous linguist and lawyer. He was killed in the deportations within days of being deported from Marsoobian. And I'm working with the new owner of the house. He's very interested in who owned the house before, and he's going to be putting a plaque. When I talk about memory sites, this is what we're doing. We're identifying Armenian sites in the town. This is another home that's recently been restored. It was Professor Symposium house. This is owned by the municipality, and I'm working with, again, the mayor's office to have some identifying information here. And this is just an image of him. This is the Armenian Protestant church, one of the only two churches that remained. Others were destroyed. This is the church. My grandfather and part of my family were Protestants. This would have been my grandfather's church where he was a deacon. Unfortunately, the church was completed in April of 1915, so there was never a church service. It was dedicated, but the people in Marsoobian remember it as the movie theater because it was turned into a cinema for decades and decades. It was the cinema. And we're working to, again, put a plaque there to identify what it was. The last is that we're going around looking at old Armenian homes with the local group that we want to turn into a memory site, a sort of bed and breakfast for people who come. And many of the photographs are going to be put in the site in the town. This is one of the three properties, the one that is in the best shape that the locals are going to buy. I'm not involved in buying it. If I was, the price would probably go up, even though I'm a poor academic. And just some more images of the church. This is the Catholic Armenian church. There were three Christian groups, the Apostolic, the Catholic, the Protestant. This is the back of it. As you can see, it was a church. This is what it looks inside. It's a wedding parlor. And I met with the mayor, he also indicated that this was going to be restored into some more civic function. And last, there's an Armenian monastery that's a farm outside of the town, and this farm plays an important role in the family story. I won't go into details, but we're in the process of, again, designating it. As you can see, there are frescoes inside the barn structure here. And I'm going to just skip this part and really get to my conclusion, because I've done this also in another community in eastern Anatolia called Chunkush, where there's an aspect of the family story, and there's some remnants of the Armenian presence there. So this is the three parts: the exhibitions, the book, and the memory sites. Okay, and this is what I've been working on. Let me conclude with my concluding paragraph. I conclude this part of my talk with one last point about the moral value of bearing witness. Bearing witness to the suffering of victims of wrongdoing may be understood in part as a symbolic act whose moral value consists in expressing one's intrinsically valuable allegiance to the good and repudiation of the bad, bearing witness to the suffering of those who were wronged, like punishing those who wronged them, cannot restore the victims to their former state, of course. But bearing witness to the suffering of those who were wronged can symbolize one's commitment to the moral order that was upset by and destroyed by the genocide. The moral norms that were breached by the wrongdoing and the undeserved suffering. And it can also symbolize this long after no perpetrators are left to punish, and that's the important point here. Thus, bearing witness symbolically asserts the moral status of the victims, their membership in the moral community, by giving them and their suffering a voice. And that's what I've been doing, is giving them a voice. And when we heed that voice, we affirm that status, however belatedly. Their voice may have been silenced in the past, but now there is someone who speaks for them and of what they have endured. Thank you very much.